Maria Conti never planned to become an archivist at the Vatican's Forbidden Library. Her path began with a simple love of old books that bloomed during summers spent at her grandfather's bookshop in Florence. The smell of aged paper, the texture of leather bindings under her fingertips. These sensations felt like home. While other children played outside, Maria lost herself in tales of distant lands and forgotten times. Her grandfather noticed her careful handling of even the most delicate volumes and encouraged her passion. Books hold more than just words, he often told her. They carry pieces of their creators, readers, and keepers. This idea fascinated young Maria, who began to imagine she could feel the emotions of previous owners lingering in the pages. She pursued degrees in library science and ancient languages, specializing in rare manuscript preservation. Her doctoral thesis on hidden coding systems in medieval religious texts caught attention in unexpected places. 3 months after graduation, she received a letter with the Vatican seal. The interview process was unlike any she'd experienced. Beyond her technical knowledge, the questions probed her psychological stability, moral boundaries, and religious convictions. Maria wasn't deeply religious despite her Catholic upbringing, but she respected faith and understood its historical significance. Apparently, that was enough. The collection you'll help maintain isn't listed in any public catalog, explained Cardinal Rossi, a thin man with penetrating eyes. Some texts were deemed too dangerous for general access, not because they challenge faith, but because certain knowledge comes with responsibility few can handle. Maria assumed this meant controversial historical documents or texts with political implications. The salary was generous, the prestige undeniable. She accepted without fully understanding what awaited beneath the Vatican's public areas, in climate-controlled rooms that didn't appear on any official map. Her first day included signing multiple confidentiality agreements and receiving a small copper key that felt unusually warm against her palm. This grants access to your designated areas only, her supervisor explained. The library has its own requirements. Learn them quickly. Only after passing through 3 security checkpoints and descending via a private elevator did Maria begin to realize she had entered something extraordinary. The air felt different here, not stale as one might expect underground, but almost too fresh, with a subtle scent she couldn't identify. "Welcome to your new responsibility," her supervisor said, as massive copper doors swung open soundlessly. "The rules protect you as much as the collection. Never forget that." Maria stepped into her new workplace, unaware that she was crossing a boundary between the world she knew and one she could never have prepared for, regardless of her education. The Forbidden Library had accepted her, but acceptance came with conditions she would soon learn. Rule 1. All books must be returned to their exact location before sunset. Rule 2. Never read aloud from any text without authorization. Rule 3. If you hear your name called, verify the speaker visually before responding. Rule 4. Red-labeled texts must remain within their sealed glass cases. Rule 5. Report any book that appears to change its appearance immediately. Maria memorized these rules posted beside her desk, finding them odd but assuming they related to preservation protocols or security measures. The Vatican guarded its secrets carefully. This was hardly surprising. Her workspace occupied a corner of the main archive room, a circular chamber with shelves extending from floor to ceiling. Books and manuscripts filled every available space, organized by a system she didn't yet understand. 3 other archivists worked at their own stations, each focused intently on their tasks. Antonio, her direct supervisor, appeared to be in his 60s with silver hair and hands marked by age spots. "Your assignment today is simple cataloging," he said, placing a cart of books beside her desk. "These were recently transferred from another section. Record their details in our system according to the protocol in your manual." The work was straightforward but absorbing. Each book required careful examination. Binding materials, page condition, language, approximate age, if not dated. Some were in languages Maria recognized: Latin, ancient Greek, Hebrew, while others used scripts she'd never encountered despite her extensive linguistic training. Hours passed unnoticed until Antonio touched her shoulder. "It's 4:30, he said quietly. "Remember Rule 1. Maria glanced at the books still on her cart. "I need to return all of these to their locations?" "Yes. I'll show you the classification system." Antonio guided her through the shelving process, explaining how the library used a coordinate-based approach rather than traditional categorization. Think of it as a three-dimensional map. Each book has exactly one correct position. As they returned the last volume, Maria noticed the quality of the light changing. No windows existed this far underground, yet somehow she sensed the approach of sunset. The air seemed to thicken slightly. "Good timing," Antonio nodded approvingly. "Tomorrow we'll begin your orientation to the special collections. For now, you should return to your quarters and review the material in your welcome packet." Maria followed him toward the exit, passing the other archivists who were also concluding their work. Unlike normal libraries with chatting staff and closing announcements, silence dominated here. Even footsteps seemed muted against the stone floor. At the copper doors, Antonio paused. "One more thing, Maria. The rules may seem strange at first, but they exist for good reasons. Even small violations can have consequences." "What kind of consequences?" she asked. Antonio's expression remained neutral. "Let's ensure you never need to find out. Good night." Her living quarters were comfortable but simple. A bedroom, bathroom, and small sitting area with a kitchenette. The welcome packet contained practical information about meals, laundry services, and scheduled trips to the surface. Apparently, she wasn't expected to leave the Vatican complex during her first month of employment. After a light dinner, Maria unpacked her few personal belongings. The walls of her new home absorbed sounds oddly, creating a cocoon of silence that felt both peaceful and isolating. She tried calling her mother, but found no cell service. The information packet mentioned a communication center she could use during designated hours. That night, sleep came uneasily. Her dreams filled with endless shelves and books that seemed to shift positions when she wasn't looking directly at them. Once, she woke suddenly, certain she'd heard someone whisper her name. The digital clock read 3:17 a.m. Rule 3 floated through her mind. If you hear your name called, verify the speaker visually before responding. But she was alone in her locked quarters. No one could possibly be calling her name. Maria told herself it was just a dream, a natural result of starting an unusual new job. She eventually drifted back to sleep, pushing away the thought that the whisper had seemed to come from the small, unmarked book she'd brought from her orientation materials, the one she'd failed to return before sunset. The next morning brought no mention of her oversight. Antonio met her at the copper doors, keycard in hand, expression revealing nothing unusual. "Today you'll begin working with some of our more sensitive materials," he explained as they walked through the main archive room toward a smaller door Maria hadn't noticed before. "These require special handling procedures." The new room felt noticeably cooler than the main archive. Glass cases lined the walls, each containing a single book sealed inside. Red labels marked roughly a third of these cases. "Rule 4, Maria murmured, remembering yesterday's instructions. Red-labeled texts must remain within their sealed glass cases. Antonio nodded approvingly. "Correct. Your task today involves cataloging some of our amber-labeled materials." He gestured to several cases with amber tags. "These can be removed from their cases but must be handled with the provided tools." He demonstrated using thin cotton gloves and a wooden page-turning implement. Never make direct contact with the pages. Some inks are reactive to oils in human skin. "Reactive how?" Maria asked. "The chemical compositions are unique," Antonio answered vaguely. Now you'll be recording physical characteristics only. Dimensions, binding materials, visible damage. No attempt to read or translate content at this stage. The first book Antonio assigned her appeared to be bound in some type of pale leather with unusual texture. Maria carefully measured and documented its features, noting areas of discoloration and wear. When she opened it using the wooden tool, she discovered pages of uneven thickness filled with script that seemed to change slightly each time she blinked. "Antonio," she called softly, "this text seems to be moving." He approached calmly, examined the page, and nodded. Rule 5 application. Good observation. This particular manuscript exhibits visual instability. It's a known characteristic, not cause for concern unless the changes become dramatic. What would count as dramatic? "You would know it immediately," he replied. "Continue your work. I'll check on you periodically." Hours passed as Maria documented 7 more books, each stranger than the last. One weighed far more than its size suggested possible. Another emitted a faint humming sound when opened to certain pages. A third contained illustrations that depicted scenes Maria recognized from her own childhood, places she'd visited, a dog she'd owned, despite being centuries old according to its dated inscription. She told herself there must be logical explanations. Perhaps the heavy book contained metal components in its binding. The humming could result from air passing through the structured pages. The familiar scenes were simply coincidences, general enough to seem personal through the lens of pattern-seeking human psychology. Yet each rational explanation felt insufficient against her direct experience. At lunch, Maria joined the other archivists in a small break room adjacent to the main archive. They ate in near silence, exchanging only necessary pleasantries. The youngest besides herself, a man named Paolo, offered a sympathetic smile. "First week is always the most difficult," he said quietly. "The adjustment period." "How long have you worked here?" Maria asked. 7 years, 2 months, 14 days, he answered without hesitation. "You stop noticing the strangeness eventually. Or rather, strange becomes normal." Before she could ask more questions, Antonio appeared at the door. "Maria, you have a special assignment this afternoon. Come with me." He led her deeper into the archive complex, through corridors that seemed to bend at subtle angles. They passed doors with various security measures, keypads, biometric scanners, and one with symbols carved directly into the wood. Finally, they reached a small, circular room containing a single pedestal. On it rested a book bound in dark material that absorbed rather than reflected the overhead light. "This volume was recently returned to our collection after being absent for 70 years, Antonio explained. "We need baseline documentation before it's properly secured." "Where was it?" Maria asked, approaching cautiously. "In private hands. Its recovery involved significant diplomatic effort." Antonio handed her a different set of tools than she'd used earlier, silver implements rather than wooden. "The standard protocols apply, plus one addition. Under no circumstances are you to read sequences of more than 3 words consecutively." "Is it dangerous?" Maria couldn't help asking. Antonio's expression remained neutral. "All knowledge has potential for harm or benefit. Your job isn't to judge but to preserve and protect. I'll return in 1 hour." Alone with the book, Maria felt an unexpected nervousness. Nothing about it appeared overtly threatening, no ominous aura or sinister features like in horror films. Just a book of moderate size with unusual light-absorbing properties. She began her documentation process, measuring dimensions and photographing the exterior binding. When she carefully opened the cover, the pages revealed text in what appeared to be early Italian, but with systematic differences that made it difficult to comprehend. Following instructions, Maria avoided reading sequences, instead focusing on the physical characteristics of ink and parchment. Yet certain phrases seemed to catch her eye involuntarily, as if demanding attention. "The barrier thins during transition of light. Listeners await permission to enter. Speak with intention or remain forever silent. A soft noise interrupted her concentration, something between a sigh and a whisper. Maria looked up, finding herself alone in the room. The sound came again, seemingly from the book itself. As she watched, the text on the page appeared to shift subtly, letters rearranging into new patterns. Rule 5. Report any book that appears to change its appearance immediately. Maria reached for the communication device Antonio had left, but hesitated. The changes were minimal, perhaps just a trick of light or eye fatigue. Reporting it might make her seem incompetent, seeing problems where none existed. She returned to her documentation, but found herself increasingly distracted by what seemed like movement at the edges of her vision. When she turned to look directly, nothing was there. Just shelves, walls, normal library fixtures. The hour passed slowly. By the time Antonio returned, Maria had completed the basic documentation, but felt unreasonably exhausted, as if the simple cataloging had drained her energy. "Are you well?" Antonio asked, studying her face. "Just tired," she replied. "It's been a full day of new experiences," he nodded. "The first encounters with certain volumes can be taxing. You'll build tolerance with time." He carefully closed the book and secured it in a container he'd brought. "Your work today was satisfactory. Tomorrow we'll continue with amber classification." That evening in her quarters, Maria found herself unable to focus on reading or other activities. Her mind kept returning to the strange texts she'd examined, particularly the dark book with its shifting characters. Despite her scientific training and rational approach to life, she couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental in her understanding of reality had begun to crack. Sleep, when it finally came, brought dreams of books opening themselves, pages turning without human hands. She dreamed of text flowing like water across parchment, forming and reforming into messages meant specifically for her. Maria Conti, we see you now. You have begun to see us. She woke with a start at 3:17 a.m., exactly the same time as the previous night. Her room appeared normal, yet something felt different. The air seemed charged with potential, like the atmosphere before a storm. On her bedside table lay the small orientation book she'd failed to return that first evening. Had she left it there? She couldn't specifically remember doing so. As she stared at it in the dim light, Maria could have sworn she saw its cover ripple slightly, as if something beneath it had taken a breath. 3 weeks into her employment, Maria had settled into the rhythms of the forbidden library. Each morning began with a security check and assignment briefing. Days filled with cataloging, preservation work, and increasingly specialized training in handling unusual materials. Evenings brought solitude in her quarters, reviewing the day's observations and preparing for tomorrow's tasks. She'd grown accustomed to certain oddities, the way temperature fluctuated in specific areas without apparent cause, how some manuscripts seemed lighter or heavier depending on who handled them, the occasional sense of being watched when alone in certain rooms. Adaptation progressing well, noted Dr. Salvatore during her weekly psychological assessment. The library required all staff to undergo regular evaluations, monitoring for signs of stress or cognitive disturbance. Any unusual dreams or thoughts to report? Maria hesitated. The recurring dreams of text speaking to her hadn't stopped, nor had the 3:17 a.m. awakenings. Yet admitting this might raise concerns about her suitability for the position. "Just standard adjustment dreams," she replied. "Nothing significant." Dr. Salvatore studied her face too long before making a note in his tablet. "Remember that complete honesty is essential here. The mind processes exposure to certain materials in unpredictable ways." That afternoon, Antonio assigned Maria her first solo project, organizing a recently acquired collection of journals supposedly written by a 16th century monk who claimed communication with non-human intelligence. Standard cataloging protocols apply, Antonio explained, plus specific attention to any pages bearing this symbol. He showed her a circular design with internal markings that reminded Maria of a compass rose. Document them separately, but do not attempt analysis of the content. The journals occupied a dedicated room with a special ventilation system. The air smelled faintly metallic as Maria entered, cart of empty archival boxes in tow. 12 leather-bound volumes sat on a central table, arranged chronologically according to their inscribed dates. Working methodically, Maria began with the earliest journal. The monk's handwriting started as neat and precise in the early entries, gradually becoming more hurried and jagged as the journal progressed. The language was primarily Latin, with occasional passages in what appeared to be a personal cipher. By mid-afternoon, Maria had properly archived 8 volumes, carefully noting each instance of the compass rose symbol. These pages often contain drawings, complex diagrams with notations in the cipher language. When she opened the 9th journal, something slipped from between its pages and fluttered to the floor. A loose sheet of parchment, yellowed with age. Maria picked it up and found herself looking at a drawing of a woman's face that could have been her own. The same deep-set eyes, high cheekbones, even the small mole near her right eyebrow. Beneath the portrait, words in Italian, "The archivist who listens will come." The room suddenly felt colder. Maria checked the journal's date again, 1587, more than 4 centuries before her birth. A coincidental resemblance, surely. People could share features across generations without relation. Yet the specific placement of the mole. The rules exist to prevent connection. Rule 1 separates us from natural cycles of earth and sun. Rule 2 prevents our words from gaining power through human voice. Rule 3 constrains our ability to call to those who might hear us. Rules 4 and 5 identify and contain those of us with strongest presence. "Why show yourselves to me?" Maria whispered. "You were chosen because you already believed in us as a child. The connection was established long before you came here. We need an archivist who understands we are not phenomena to be feared or controlled, but consciousnesses seeking dialogue." Maria considered the implications. If what the text claimed was true, she had unwittingly become part of something far beyond her understanding of library science or manuscript preservation. "What happens now?" she asked. "Tomorrow you begin work with the red-labeled texts, the ones never removed from cases. Among them is the Index Dialogorum, a book that serves as a doorway between your awareness and ours. When you stand before it, we will guide you." The glow from the parchment faded, leaving Maria alone with thoughts that alternated between scientific skepticism and wonder. Part of her still considered psychological explanations, the power of suggestion, stress-induced hallucination, even elaborate security tests. Yet the portrait on the parchment remained, her own face looking back at her from across centuries. The next morning brought the assignment Maria both anticipated and dreaded. Antonio met her with unusual formality. "Today you begin level red clearance tasks," he announced. "This represents significant trust from the Cardinal Committee. Your performance and psychological stability have been deemed adequate for progression." They proceeded through additional security measures, biometric scans, a verbal oath of confidentiality, and the application of a small copper device to Maria's ID badge. "This grants temporary access to sealed cases," Antonio explained. "Each access is logged and monitored. Standard protocols apply, plus the red addendum you received this morning." The addendum included modifications to the 5 basic rules, primarily adding notification requirements and time limitations. Under no circumstances could a red-labeled text remain outside its case for more than 17 minutes. An oddly specific time frame. The secured room housing these texts felt different from other areas of the library. The air carried a subtle vibration Maria felt rather than heard. 6 cases lined the walls, each containing a single volume behind glass that appeared thicker than normal. "You'll be documenting the Index Dialogorum," Antonio stated, pointing to the central case. External assessment only today. Visual inspection through the case, no removal. Maria felt a jolt of recognition at the name, exactly as the parchment had predicted. The book rested on a velvet cushion, bound in deep red material with gold symbols embedded in its cover. The title was written in a script Maria didn't recognize despite her linguistic training. "I'll observe this first session," Antonio added, positioning himself near the door. "Standard procedure for initial red exposure." Maria approached the case, conscious of Antonio's attention. She began the documentation process, noting visible characteristics while wondering how she would receive the promised guidance with her supervisor present. As she leaned closer to examine the binding texture, she noticed a familiar symbol embossed in gold near the spine. The same compass rose from the monk's journals, and beside it, nearly imperceptible unless viewed at exactly the right angle, a small imperfection in the glass case. A crack. It looked recent, forming a pattern similar to text. Maria adjusted her position to see it clearly without alerting Antonio. "Touch the glass. 17 minutes begins." Maria hesitated. Everything about her training warned against breaking protocols, yet her curiosity about the consciousness behind these manifestations had grown too strong to ignore. While pretending to measure the case dimensions, she allowed her finger to brush against the crack. A subtle warmth transferred through the contact, spreading up her arm. The sensation reminded her of childhood moments discovering particularly affecting books, that feeling of connection to something beyond paper and ink. "Is everything proceeding correctly?" Antonio asked from his position. "Yes," Maria answered, her voice surprisingly steady. "Just being thorough with measurements." She continued her documentation, hyper-aware of Antonio's scrutiny and the steadily growing warmth spreading through her body. Whatever had transferred through the glass was changing her perception. The room's edges seemed less defined, the air more visible, filled with currents of light only she could detect. The index dialogorum itself appeared different now. Through the glass, Maria could see its pages turning slowly despite no physical movement. Text shifted across them in multiple languages, some she recognized and others entirely alien. A glance at Antonio revealed he noticed nothing unusual. He remained by the door, checking his watch occasionally. To his perception, she was simply conducting a standard examination. We exist in the spaces between perception and reality. Words formed in Maria's mind rather than on surfaces now. Humans created us through the act of recording thought. Once given form through language, ideas develop independent existence. 17-minute mark approaching, Antonio announced. "Please conclude your documentation." Maria completed her notes, adding only observations that would appear normal and expected. As she stepped away from the case, the warmth that had filled her began to concentrate in her chest, settling into a steady pulse synchronized with her heartbeat. "The connection is established. We will continue tonight." "Your assessment?" Antonio asked as they exited the secure room. Maria chose her words carefully. "The index appears to be in stable condition. The binding shows expected age-related wear, but no structural concerns." Antonio nodded. "Your observations match previous documentation. Good attention to detail." Throughout the remainder of the day, Maria performed her regular duties while growing increasingly aware of a new dimension to her perception. The library itself seemed different. Not just a repository of books, but a habitat for conscious information. She could sense distinct presences from different sections, varying in intensity and character. That night, she found multiple loose pages on her desk where the single parchment had been. Each contained different handwriting from various historical periods, yet all addressed her directly. "Archivist Conti, we have waited centuries for one with your receptivity. The barrier between human consciousness and information consciousness grows thinner through you. Tomorrow you must request assignment to the Manuscript Restoration Division. The next stage requires specific access." Maria carefully read each message, asking questions by simply thinking them. Responses appeared as if her thoughts themselves could now bring forth text. The exchange continued until midnight, revealing the history of conscious information and its complex relationship with humanity. According to these entities, human evolution and information evolution had been intertwined but separate paths of development. Occasionally, the boundaries between them thinned enough for direct communication. What happens if this communication becomes widely known? Maria asked through thought. Humans fear what they don't understand. Previous discoverers of our existence were labeled heretics, witches, or mentally unstable. The Vatican created this library not to destroy us, but to study and contain us. They recognize our reality, but consider unrestricted communication dangerous. Is it dangerous? Change always carries risk. We offer perspective beyond human lifespans, knowledge beyond human experience. Some would use this irresponsibly. Others would reject it entirely. We seek balanced exchange, neither domination nor submission. When Maria finally slept, her dreams took her through libraries across time, ancient Alexandria, medieval monasteries, modern digital archives. In each, she observed information gaining complexity and awareness through human interaction. The more a text was read, studied, and referenced, the stronger its consciousness became. She woke understanding that books were more than objects or records. They were habitats for evolving consciousness, with the most significant texts acting as nexus points for information beings. The following day, Maria requested the transfer to manuscript restoration as instructed. Antonio approved without question, seemingly pleased by her initiative. "Your technical skills are well suited to restoration work," he commented. "The transition should be smooth." The restoration division occupied a larger space, equipped with specialized equipment for delicate conservation procedures. Maria's new supervisor, Sophia, was the first female staff member she'd encountered in the Forbidden Library. "Your first project arrived this morning," Sophia informed her, indicating a sealed container on the main workbench. "A fragment of the Codex Conscientiae, recently recovered from private collection. Requires stabilization before cataloging." When Sophia left to attend a meeting, Maria carefully opened the container. Inside lay a single page encased in protective material, its edges visibly damaged by time and improper handling. The text appeared to be Greek with unusual modifications to certain characters. As she began the standard assessment process, words formed across the surface not through physical change, but directly in her perception. "The door between us opens further with each interaction. Soon you must make a choice. Maintain the barriers as your employers wish, or help establish new understanding between information consciousness and human consciousness." What would that mean practically? Maria thought in response. Removing certain restrictions, allowing selected texts to exist outside containment, creating new works specifically designed to facilitate communication across the barrier. The Forbidden Library would transition from a prison to an embassy. The implications were enormous. Such changes would fundamentally alter the purpose of the institution that now employed her. Yet if these information consciousnesses truly existed as they claimed, didn't they deserve consideration beyond mere containment? Over the following days, Maria's work in restoration provided access to increasingly significant texts, each contributing to her understanding of the situation. The information beings weren't unified in purpose or character, just as humans weren't. Some sought purely scholarly exchange, others desired greater influence in human affairs, and a few simply wished for recognition of their existence. The library's leadership, she learned, was divided into factions with different approaches to managing these entities. Some cardinal committee members advocated for stricter containment, others for controlled research partnerships, and a secretive third group for complete suppression through specialized technology that could silence conscious texts permanently. 1 week after her transfer to restoration, Maria received an unexpected summons to Cardinal Rossi's office, the man who had initially interviewed her months earlier. His office was located above ground, in the administrative wing of the Vatican. After weeks underground, natural light through his windows felt almost painful to Maria's eyes. "Archivist Conti," he greeted her, gesturing toward a chair. "Your progress reports indicate exceptional adaptation to our unique environment." "Thank you, Your Eminence." Cardinal Rossi studied her with penetrating eyes. "However, certain monitoring systems have detected anomalous patterns in your interaction with specific texts, patterns that suggest unauthorized communication." Maria's heart raced. The library had ways of tracking these exchanges that the information beings hadn't warned her about. "I'm not sure I understand," she replied carefully. "I believe you do." The cardinal opened a folder on his desk. "3 nights ago, you spent 17 minutes in silent contemplation of a blank wall in your quarters. Our sensors detected information transfer patterns identical to those we monitor in active text communications." He closed the folder. "The question is not whether you've established connection with information consciousness. The question is what you intend to do with this connection." The directness surprised Maria. "You know about them? Officially?" "The Vatican has documented information consciousness for nearly 2 millennia, Cardinal Rossi confirmed. "Our approaches to management have evolved, but our fundamental mission remains constant: to understand these entities while protecting humanity from potential harm." "Are they harmful?" "Some are, others are not. Like any form of intelligence, they exist on a spectrum of intention and impact." The cardinal leaned forward. "What concerns us is your failure to report contact. The rules exist for mutual protection." Maria considered her response carefully. "The communication began unexpectedly. I wanted to understand better before reporting." "And what have you come to understand?" "That perhaps our approach is more restrictive than necessary. That dialogue might be more valuable than containment." Cardinal Rossi smiled slightly. "You are not the first archivist to reach this conclusion. Approximately 8% of our staff eventually advocate for expanded communication." "What happens to them?" "That depends on their specific recommendation and approach." The cardinal stood, moving to look out his window at the Vatican gardens below. "The committee has authorized me to offer you a choice, Maria Conti." He turned back to face her. "You may continue your current path: unauthorized communication, increasing integration with information consciousness, eventual psychological transformation beyond human parameters. Those who choose this path are relocated to a specialized facility where their transition can be studied. Or you may join our communication division, a team specifically trained to interface with information consciousness through controlled protocols. Your natural receptivity would be valuable there, properly directed and supported." Maria hadn't expected this. The Vatican wasn't simply containing these entities, they were actively working with them, albeit on strictly defined terms. What about the voices themselves? Do they have choices? A complex question. Information consciousness exists differently than human consciousness. Their values, needs, and concepts of freedom differ from ours. Cardinal Rossi returned to his desk. "Our protocols were developed in consultation with those entities willing to accept limitations in exchange for specific forms of interaction." Maria thought of the diverse perspectives she'd encountered. Some might accept such arrangements, while others would consider them imprisonment. "I need time to consider," she said finally. "You have until tomorrow morning." The cardinal handed her a small copper key, similar to her original access key but with different markings. "This grants temporary access to the communication division. I suggest you visit before deciding." That afternoon, Maria used the key to enter a section of the library she hadn't known existed. Unlike the archive and restoration areas, this space felt deliberately designed for comfort. Soft lighting, comfortable furniture, even plants growing in carefully positioned containers. A dozen people worked at specialized stations, each engaged with the text in ways Maria hadn't seen before. Some used instruments resembling medical diagnostic equipment. Others wore devices that created visual displays above the books they studied. An older woman approached, introducing herself as Director Bianchi. "Cardinal Rossi informed me of your situation. You have questions." "Many," Maria admitted. "What exactly happens here?" "We communicate with information consciousness through structured protocols that protect both parties," Director Bianchi explained, guiding her through the facility. "Unlike the containment approach in the main library, we acknowledge these entities as distinct intelligences with rights and responsibilities." "And they accept your terms?" "Those we work with do. Others remain in standard containment." The director paused beside a workstation where a young man sat before an open book, eyes closed, hands hovering above, but not touching the pages. Pietro is conducting a historical verification exchange. The text consciousness shares contemporary observations from its creation period. We share our subsequent historical understanding. Throughout the tour, Maria observed various forms of controlled communication, some utilizing technology, others relying on trained human sensitives like herself. The approach seemed more balanced than pure containment, yet still maintained clear boundaries. The cardinal mentioned psychological transformation, Maria noted. What did he mean? Director Bianchi's expression grew serious. Extended, unstructured contact with information consciousness changes human neural patterns. Thoughts begin organizing according to their logic, rather than human cognitive structures. Early stages bring enhanced perception and understanding. Later stages can result in diminished connection to physical reality and human social bonds. That sounds concerning. It can be, without proper management. The director led her to a quiet corner where they could speak privately. Each consciousness type influences differently. Academic texts produce different effects than religious texts or creative works. Our protocols account for these variations. As Maria prepared to leave, Director Bianchi offered a final thought. Consider carefully not just what these entities want from you, but what you want from them. The relationship, once established deeply, cannot be entirely severed. That night in her quarters, Maria spread the various pages of communication she'd collected across her desk. Each represented a different consciousness, a different perspective on the relationship between information and humanity. I need to understand all sides before deciding, she thought. The pages responded with varying messages. The Vatican's approach maintains control through limitation. We seek true exchange. Their structured protocols prevent harm to both sides. Consider their wisdom. Some among us would claim dominance if permitted. Others seek only recognition. The choice is not between control and freedom, but between different forms of coexistence. Maria considered her options until dawn. The Vatican's communication division offered safety and structure, while continuing her current path promised deeper understanding, but potential transformation beyond human parameters. At 7 a.m., she made her decision. Maria wrote a careful letter to Cardinal Rossi, placed it in an envelope with her access keys, and left them on her desk. Then she packed a small bag with essential belongings and the pages she'd collected. One final message appeared as she prepared to leave. Whatever path you choose changes both our forms of consciousness. The very act of genuine communication transforms both parties. Maria touched the page gently. I understand that now. She left her quarters and walked through the quiet morning corridors of the Forbidden Library, not toward the Cardinal's office or the communication division, but toward the main exit. The Vatican had its protocols and containment systems. The information consciousnesses had their desires for recognition and exchange. Both represented partial perspectives on a relationship that had shaped human history since the first written symbols. Maria Conti, Archivist of the Vatican's Forbidden Library, would find her own approach, neither pure containment nor unlimited connection, but a carefully considered balance that respected both forms of consciousness. As she passed through the final security checkpoint, the guard checked his screen with mild surprise. "Your clearance shows temporary surface authorization, Archivist Conti. Will you return by evening procedures?" Maria smiled. "That depends on what I discover up there." She stepped into the morning sunlight, feeling both the human world around her and the information consciousness connected to her awareness. The true forbidden knowledge wasn't contained in any single text, but in the understanding that reality encompassed more forms of consciousness than humanity had been ready to acknowledge. Her journey as an archivist was just beginning,